So I wanted to explain exactly how, well, I wanted to go through the process of cutting two top plates in order to get the drop deck. So what you're going to need for this build is you're going to need two top plates. Now Impulse creates two, well, they've released two different, well, actually I think it's three different types of top plate revisions. It's a different top plate altogether. As you can see, this one has this section here, whereas this one's cut out, and this one's not as deep as this. So there's a few revisions that ImpulseRC have released. It doesn't really matter what, which one you use, because you're going to either be making the decision of, keeping one that has the cutout at the back, or keeping one that doesn't have the cutout at the back. Making the decision of what you want the front of the top plate to look like, whether you want this cut out or whether you prefer the original design with this section. So what I've decided with this build is, for this top plate, I'm going to be using this one here. So I'm not going to be using this front section with this top plate. I'm going to be using this rear section. And for the front section, which is this guy, I'm going to be using this top plate. If I want it to be deep enough, then I can always sort of chop this section off. But given that it's a drop deck, I think that this support structure here is I think it's better if it's a little bit stronger. So I'm just going to do it that way. In order to cut the top plates, you need a few things, and I wouldn't recommend that. If you're unfamiliar with cutting carbon, and you don't want to be breathing in carbon particles, it's really bad for you. So if you are going to do it, I'd recommend that you use eye protection, and the kind of eye protection that I use is this guy here. You want to be able to cover your eyes enough so then the particles can't make their ways into places that they're not meant to be. And then a dust mask. I recommend you get something like this. What I'm going to do is, because this doesn't have the straps on it like this one here, these ones are pretty cheap. I think these ones are a few cents, as opposed to this one being probably about $5 or $8. And you usually get 2 or 3 in the box. I'd recommend you get one of these. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this behind these cheap ones, and then just use the straps on that. So 3 layers of protection, I think that's enough. And then of course the Dremel itself, I use I don't know where, it doesn't really have that much information on the tip, but I guess the thinnest part you can use that comes with your Dremel, that's what I would use. And it's just attached to a little rubber grommet with a screw and a washer. And we're going to go ahead and cut what we need. So what I do first is I measure enough room for the top and rear section, just some electrical tape. And then you want to give enough space for the standoff. You don't want to cut across the carbon too close to the standoff hole. So you don't want to cut here. You want to cut sort of further behind. So then you get that rounded sort of area here. I'm going to put the electrical tape here, just enough to give you a bit of clearance, so you don't want to cut too close to that hole. And then for the second piece, so it's basically 2 cuts, so one here and one here, and then you've separated and you've got your lower deck. And then I'm going to just use the diamond hardware that comes with an Alien 5-inch, and just sand it so then it looks it looks clean, and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I went ahead and used the dremel to cut the two top plate sections. So as you can see, it's looking pretty rough at the moment, but we're going to clean that up. This is the other section, the rear section. So really easy, like it took less than, probably say it took less than a couple of minutes, maybe even less than a minute to cut those. So what I do next is I screw the two top plates together using just a 6mm screw, like that. And I screw these together. It makes it really easy with the filing, with the diamond filing hardware, to just start, you know, filing away what you need in order to get it nice and smooth on either side. So I'll probably sand that all the way down to this guy here, to the shorter plate, and then I'll start to sort of make them nice and, you know, rounded off, so then it looks nice and clean. So it takes a bit of work to get it done. Be really careful that you're not sanding too much, and once you're happy with how it looks, you know, it doesn't have to look perfect. You know, maybe just file the edges and get it to a state where you're happy with. Once we've done that, we'll move on to the next step. But what I would recommend that is, if you're doing it, you don't do it in an environment where, you know, again, you can breathe in all the carbon. I actually do it underwater, so then, you know, that the carbon dust and particles don't fly everywhere. So don't be afraid to do it underwater. That's what I'm going to do. But we'll come back once I've gone ahead and sanded it all down. Okay, so I think I spent probably about 10 minutes filing away what I needed. We'll go ahead and unscrew the bolts, and we'll see a little bit more how they look separated. Okay, so, you know, look, they don't look too bad. The original top plates that I cut, I think they were a little bit, you know, there was a bit more room on the edges, but look, that's okay. I'm happy with that. Okay, so I'm just going to test the standoff clearance and make sure that the standoff clearance is enough. Yeah, so as you can see, there's, you know, I'm happy with that clearance. There's enough difference between, you know, the bolt in here and then here to the bolt. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next step, which is assembling the two top decks. You're going to need two M3 by 15mm standoffs, like that, and you're going to need two 35mm standoffs. Just the original Alien 35mm standoffs will do. You need 6 19mm standoffs. So it doesn't really matter what style of standoff you use. You know, these ones are the ones that I used on the original gold drop-deck Alien. So you've got 1, 2, 3, and yeah, like I said, it doesn't really matter which ones you use as long as they're 19mm. And these screw onto the front of the rear plate, like so, and then you've got the 19mm standoffs that screw underneath. So M3 by 15, M3 by 19mm, and then with the front top plate that sits just above the M3 by 15, and then you've got M3 by 6mm screws that screw into the front of that. And then the M3 by 19mm, the rest of them screw onto the back. So then with the two 35mm standoffs, I use button heads on the end. So you just screw in like normal. They're the two top plates. And then when you've got the bottom plate, front protector goes there, two standoffs dock into there, and then the rear antenna mount sits like that. Just slides into the two rear standoffs, like so. And that's how it is. So I'll go ahead and assemble the rest of the Alien. Okay, so I recommend that you watch part 1 of the gold Alien 5-inch build, because that goes into much more detail about not only converting over an existing Alien 5-inch frame from an original PDB, but it goes into detail on how to replace that with the Steele PDB. So with the Alien 5-inch Mr. Steele edition, you get all of the carbon pieces are chamfered, so they've got chamfered edges. So I just thought I'd mention that because it looks awesome. Yeah, the bottom plate as well is chamfered. Really nice. It saves you having to file away the carbon. And I did that with the front and rear top plates as well. So I'm going to go ahead and solder on the motors. So the motors that I'm using are the 2207 2450 kV Cobras. They're exactly the same specs as the original Drop-Deck Alien. It's just that the color is different. So I've gone with Dolphin Blue for this build, and these are the VEC edition motors. So I'm going to go ahead and solder everything up, and then we'll go ahead and connect the top plates to the body. Okay, so the motors are installed on the ESCs. With the ESCs, I just strap a bit of electrical tape around each ESC, and I use some thick double-sided tape as well. So it sort of adds a little bit of protection underneath the KISS FCs. You know, when you have a harsh crash, you don't want the components underneath the ESCs to be damaged. So I just stick a bit of double-sided tape like that. In order to get the camera assembly in nice and flush, you've got to make sure that the two front standoffs, and this applies to any Alien build regardless of whether you build the drop deck, but the two front standoffs have to be in this orientation, otherwise the camera assembly won't fit in properly. And that applies to the two front and two rear standoffs as well. So just make sure that the orientation is correct, and that way the camera assembly will fit in perfectly. And with the antenna, you use two small zip ties like so. So I utilize these 3 holes, and then I have a larger zip tie that wraps around the entire antenna, and then I use heat shrink as well, a long bit of heat shrink just to protect the antenna. And then I just have that VTX Unify Pro, I don't know what you call it, just that gold section sitting almost center of the that triangle here. And then that way the VTX, the TBS Unify, ends up sitting directly behind the HS1177 like that. And then there's just enough room to feed 2 battery straps just underneath the VTX antenna cable. And then it's just a matter of connecting the antenna tube, or feeding the antennas through the antenna tube. Like that. So I usually connect the camera wire first, and then the VTX. Make sure that clips in like so. And then when you connect, or when you screw in the camera assembly, so as you can see, there's a wire that is caught underneath that section of the camera assembly. So just make sure that before you screw it all down, you don't have any wires that are like that could potentially break. And then you can just go ahead and screw the rest of the 6mm bolts in. So that's it. That's the drop deck screwed in to the frame. And then notice how there's just enough room above the KISS FC and above the VTX antenna to feed in a couple of battery straps as well. And that's it. The Dolphin Blue Alien 5-inch custom drop deck frame by ImpulseRC with the Steele PDB and Cobra 2207 2450 kV Vec Edition motors.